why we do what we do. I am your changing host, Abraham.
And I am your mostly furless host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that people do. And in the month of October, we pay special attention to the spooky and creepy ideas and stories that are out there. Yes. And the things that people do. So we're in the thick of it now. We're in the thick of our Halloween episodes.
Yes, we are so excited about this one. Today, we are going to talk about this concept of skinwalkers, which I would like to point out is a little bit different than werewolves. We're not talking about lycanthropy, even though that does come up in this conversation. We are not necessarily talking explicitly about lycanthropy. We are talking about the idea of skinwalkers, which involves Native American magic. So we'll get into some interesting stuff involved in this.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Before we do that, if you like what you hear today and would like to support us in whatever way makes sense for you, you can like and subscribe, leave us a rating and a review, join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, and of course, go out and tell a friend. Let them know about this cool podcast you listened to about skinwalkers or whatever topic you heard. If you're joining us for the very first time, I will also tell you again, most of our episodes are not spooky themed, but during the month of October, that is the topic we choose to dwell on for a handful of episodes. We have 4 or 5 Wednesdays this October, I believe.
Yeah,
for tackling those. So we'll have a good number of those. As always, it's usually 4 or 5 because that's how math works.
Yeah. It's usually how calendars work too, unless we went to a 13-month calendar, which we should.
Apparently, there are some countries that do that.
Yeah.
So I approve. And we have a whole episode on that you can check out. That is not spooky related, not directly at least.
No.
Anyway, hope you enjoy what you hear today. Thank you so much for being with us. And as it is October 9th, I would like to wish you all a happy Bullying Prevention Day.
Yes. It's also a Curious Events Day, which I feel like is appropriate for this.
It's getting curiouser and curiouser. It is Emergency Nurses Day. Very important.
Yes, love them. It's also Fire Prevention Day.
It's going to be important for much later in this discussion. It is International Beer and Pizza Day. That is definitely a combination many people enjoy.
That is, certainly.
Not for kids.
Not for kids, though. Unless it's root beer. Root beer and pizza day, I'm very into.
You're on it. You solved it.
Yep. There you go. It's International Day for Natural Disaster Reduction. A lot of that might just be like, I don't know, adopting green policies and trying to reduce our carbon footprint. But, you know, who am I to say?
Also related to fire prevention.
Yes.
It is International Top Spinning Day. Spin them tops.
Spin them tops. It's also Leif Erikson Day.
And Eric Leifson Day. Just kidding. But it is Moldy Cheese Day, if that's your thing. Get that blue veiny cheese.
I like blue cheese. It's National Nanotechnology Day, which is kind of cool.
All right. National Pet Obesity Awareness Day. Indeed.
Oh, take care of them fat dogs. National Sneakers Day. Big fan of that. Like that.
That was a good movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
It is Stem Cell Awareness Day. Oh, we might have to talk about stem cells at some point. There's a lot of really good science and a lot of pseudoscience in that.
Yeah, that is definitely a thing that we're going to have to talk about. And a lot of like myths.
Yeah.
Like people thinking that like babies are just aborted for their stem cells. It's like, that's not how that works, but okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Gross misunderstanding.
What I don't there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here because I'm always fascinated with like things having multiple names. So today is Submarine Hoagie Hero Grinder Day.
Things squished between bread day is what we can call it.
It's just sandwich day, bro.
Yeah. It is Animal Welfare Week. I'm on board. I enjoy that.
I like that. It's also Cephalopod Awareness Week or Awareness Days. I love that actually.
Yeah. Yes. I enjoy cephalopods. Another fun one to talk about because they do not have centralized brains the way most animals do.
That's true. Fascinating creatures.
Fall Astronomy Week. Ooh, very nice.
I love starry skies, so this is one that I'm like really into. I like that.
You also like this next one, I think.
I love this next one. It's my favorite. It's Great Books Week.
Yeah.
Many books are great. Not most, but many books are great.
Accurate. We have to remember there are some people who have published books who maybe should not have. But
that's true. That is true.
International Postcard Week.
I like postcards. I like postcards.
All right.
I like the idea of postcards. I don't like the waste of postcards.
That's primarily where I come from on that. It's like,
sure,
as a nostalgia thing, before we could communicate more effectively via digital mediums and phones and whatnot.
Right.
And like, I like the idea of just like, they're really pretty pictures. They represent a place you've been. I think that point in history has kind of come and gone, though.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's mental illness awareness week, which for some people is mental illness.
Yeah, it is. And finally, it is Mystery Series Week,
which is, I think, apropos for also Halloween spooky things.
It very much is. So that is what we have to say about holidays. We do like to share those because they're fun, but we're actually here to talk about psychology things, or at least psychology adjacent. And today, as you mentioned, we are talking about skinwalkers. So as we dive into this, for starters, there are going to be a lot of asterisks throughout this episode due to the nature of the content and its origin. This is also not going to be a huge deep dive into the Navajo people, much as they might deserve a deep dive, and they probably do.
Yes.
But those stories are better shared with the people who own them. So check out the resources in our show notes. We will post the links where you can find more. We are not Navajo. We are not the people to tell their stories, but we will sort of be, again, it's adjacent to that.
Yes, and also consider donating to the Navajo Relief Fund through the partnership with Native Americans or other relief funds related to indigenous peoples in the United States because of many of the atrocities that have happened to these folks and the current struggles that do exist on many reservations in these places that these folks are living right now. So please make sure to support these cultures, these communities, and get them the resources they need through these Navajo-led or indigenous peoples-led relief funds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you might be going, what does that have to do with what we're talking about today? You'll see when we get there. This episode, we are going to talk about Navajo tradition. We are going to talk about J.K. Rowling, and we are going to talk about UFOs, which, you know, might all seem completely unrelated to skinwalkers, but I'm going to tell you right now, not so much. Get ready.
It's been a minute since we've had one of those, like, we're going to talk about how these things are related type headers in the episode. So it's fun. It's fun to have that back.
Yeah, so welcome back. So let's, I think, start with a definition.
We have to.
It's
criteria.
It is. You've heard the term skinwalker in multiple spaces, and we'll kind of get to where that came from.
Or you've never heard it, and this is all new to you.
Yeah, that might be really fun. So the term skinwalker is a term used to describe a type of witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. This comes from the Navajo Yi Nald Lushi. I don't know if I said that right.
That's a lot of consonants back to back.
There's a lot of so in a lot of vowels, like
L's.
It's a lot of it's an LD. It's spelled NAALDLOOSHII. Okay, and that actually directly translates to by means of it, it goes on all fours.
Okay.
Yeah. So
skinwalkers were described as witches that were explicitly causing harm, and never for witches or sorcerers who were considered sort of the on the healer end of things, or medicine men and women. So you might have heard the sort of distinction between good and bad witches, or even somewhere in the middle. But skinwalkers are the ones that are the maleficent.
Yeah. They're definitely like the dark sorcery part of the tradition of like magics inside of these traditions.
Hey, we're back to black magic again.
Hey, look at that. So isn't that funny how we always come back to that? So a little background on this. It's important to understand where this kind of storytelling and stuff comes from. So this comes from the Navajo people. And the Navajo are indigenous people populating areas in what is now described as the southwestern United States. So you can picture places like New Mexico, Arizona, that kind of area of what is currently the U.S.
They enjoyed the warm.
Mm-hmm.
So At the time of this writing, there are about 400,000 members enrolled as tribal members, making the Navajo tribe the largest current tribe recognized in the United States. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you might know a Navajo person.
You might, yeah. Members of the Navajo tribe speak a language called Na-Dene Southern Athabascan, or as they call it, Dene Bazad, which translates to the people's language. And there's also Navajo Sign Language, which is a dialect of Plains Sign Talk. Now, Plains Sign Talk it's also referred to as hand talk, which it was used primarily for trading among tribes, for storytelling, and for ceremonies. It was used quite often and kind of a universal language among tribes that were kind of interconnected that would engage, or clans that were interconnected that would communicate with one another when they didn't share like a spoken language.
There's so much value to that kind of thing. It's one of those where it's like,
right? If
everyone learned to speak sign and just sort of incorporated that into the normal speech, that would already be really helpful for people who have hearing impairments.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's helpful in a place that's really noisy. It's helpful in a place where you want to be very quiet. It's helpful to just help emphasize your points in different ways. It's like everyone benefits, sort of thing.
There's been this interesting thing in my world where, like, I just got back from Hawaii not too long ago, and I started doing research on this. And there is something really fascinating about listening to the storytelling and some of the traditions that existed among indigenous peoples in multiple places, because a lot of it goes, hey, we had this thing figured out, and white people came over and up a lot of it. And now what we're learning is that it's starting to come back because we actually had stuff figured out that white people didn't. And this was way more useful than what white people were doing. And like, I've heard that sentiment across multiple indigenous peoples multiple times in the last like month and a half.
Yeah, I think it seems like there's been a more recent push in sort of science circles to be more inclusive of people from these traditions that actually had done really good scholarly work.
Yeah.
And from whom we could have learned a lot centuries ago if we'd bothered to listen. And now they're finally sort of figuring that out. And I mean, better late than never, I guess. But
yeah,
unfortunate this didn't happen sooner.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, now we've been calling this tribe the Navajo tribe. That is more or less the name that I believe that they have adopted for themselves as well. But it is important to point out that this actually is not their name. The name Navajo comes from Spanish missionaries and, you know, the other jerks who came in and began just sort of renaming everyone when they got to the Americas and just coming up with their own names for them.
Yep.
The Navajo people actually referred to themselves as Dene, just as you were sort of describing in the name for their language. Which translates to the people. Other people, like the Spanish missionaries who showed up, would refer to them as Apaches or Quechos. And again, this also is not an accurate name because they're just assigning names to them that are not their names.
Right.
It's like if I met Shane and he's like, hey, my name is Shane. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to call you Steve.
Right.
Instead.
Yes.
Like, okay.
Yes. And this actually happened a lot. A lot of tribes were confused with one another because of people, outsiders coming in and just kind of saying, yes, this is this group. And it was actually like, you know, really important to understand that a lot of these tribes had different traditions, different rules, different values, different social structures. Like, I mean, incredibly diverse across all of the Americas and the indigenous peoples that lived here. Like, I mean, I live in Florida and there's a lot of indigenous history here. Daytona, the area that I'm in, was originally the Timucuan people, and there are like some tribal ruins and some spaces here too. It's really fascinating when you get into it, but somebody from the outside would go, yes, Navajo, and it's like not even close to the same traditions, not even similar in any regard.
It's like ads pushing into a podcast, unasked for and unwelcomed. Okay, we're back. We've been talking about sort of the history a bit of Navajo culture, which is important as it relates to the story of Skinwalkers that we're unpacking here today.
The Navajo folks were a semi-nomadic peoples from the 16th through the 20th centuries, though they eventually adopted farming as part of their economic practices and formed trading posts that helped with long distances between their clans because they did spread out over quite a distance. So they would actually set up trading posts where they would trade goods and have that kind of set up as like kind of mile markers between their tribes.
Cool.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if any remnants of those remained, but I would love to see one in case they did.
Yeah, I'm sure some were preserved somewhere. I would imagine they would have to be. Maybe.
Very interestingly, the Dene or the Navajo people, they formed a unique matrilineal system of society. And if you're hearing some important sort of roots in that you might be familiar with, essentially a matrilineal system is one which emphasizes women and their family owning livestock and dwellings, etc. In this system, a Navajo man would live with a woman's family, and daughters were the ones who would receive generational inheritances. The system primarily centered around the mother's clan, or the Ke? Ke? Okay.
Yeah, so basically what this was saying was like the women of the clans and the tribes were in charge, and the inheritances, the wealth, the generational wealth stayed inside of the women's family. It was not inherited by the men of the family. They got to benefit from the women having this wealth and the land and all the resources and stuff, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, very unique.
Yeah, and so another part of this too is there were not what would be described as traditional gender roles inside of the communities. Instead, men and women were considered equals since both were required to reproduce, because a lot of the history and a lot of the storytelling had to do with reproduction and building the clans and building the families and strengthening the peoples. Look at that. It takes two to tango, and both are equal members of the community. Isn't that nice?
That's insane. You can't treat people as if they're the same.
Yeah, what are we doing here? That's why we had to come in and fix it with the Bible, you know?
And inequality.
The
way of the future. Yes. The way of the past, actually, as it were.
You
make inequality great again.
Ooh. That sounds like a Florida slogan right now.
Indeed. Let's talk about the spiritual practices, because, again, we are trying to talk about the mythical things. A primary focus of Navajo spiritual practices focused on balance and harmony in one's life. We're going to mostly use the name Navajo, as that's the one that, again, seems to have largely been sort of adopted by the tribe and people who are more familiar with that.
Yeah.
But Dene is what we're talking about.
Yes. They believed that there were only two classes of people. There were earth people and there were holy people. And again, I'm going to say this. This is not our story to tell, so it's very possible these are oversimplifications. We're trying to give some historical context for this so that you can understand why the Skinwalker kind of mythos has come up, right?
I don't think I'm a holy people.
No. I don't think I'm a holy people either. I think I'm definitely an earth people. And we'll talk about that, right? So earth people were tasked with maintaining balance between Mother Earth and humans, with the expectation that they maintain a positive relationship with Earth. So the Earth people were here on Earth. They were taking from the land, but they were giving back to the land. There was a relationship there because Mother Earth gives, we receive, we return back to the land, and we take care of Mother Earth as payment for her good graces.
Wow. Love that.
Yeah.
Whole sentiment.
If only we could get back to that.
There was also the belief in the four worlds. And so the four worlds were the dark world, the blue world, the yellow world, and the glittering world. And the relationships between each are interesting. And the stories that describe their formation are pretty amazing. So take the time to check them out, because I think most of you, if you're the curious type and you found yourselves at our podcast, so I think that you might be.
Yeah.
But the gist of it is that no life exists in the dark world, despite life having started there. So life moved to the blue world and then eventually yellow world and finally settled in the glittering world.
Yes. And so Navajo spirituality includes a variety of ceremonies that align with either the blessing way or the enemy way. The blessing way ceremonies focus on restoring balance and harmony within the Dene, whereas the enemy way, those ceremonies are focused on counteracting forces from outside of the clan. So they're external forces that are trying to disrupt or deharmonize the clan. And so the enemy way ceremonies were designed to protect the clan from those outside entities to prevent them from causing more harm.
Wow. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I almost had an analogy on the tip of my tongue and then I kind of lost it. So if it comes back to me, I think it can be fun to relate things analogically.
Yeah.
Analogous, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say?
I gotcha.
Analogically, I don't know. Words are hard. Most traditions, ceremonies, and beliefs follow an oral tradition to help maintain and grow them. An oral tradition actually by itself might be something worth discussing in the context of an episode.
Yeah.
Because they provide a unique opportunity for stories to sort of continuously evolve.
Right.
And certainly, I think people will find value in the recording of stories and the telling of stories through like a print medium where the stories really don't change and evolve, or at least not as quickly. And that there's certainly value to that. And I think we could see the value in what is shared and what is afforded by an oral tradition instead, or in addition to that. So that might be worth unpacking at some point.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
That was off track. Going back to this, there's traditions and ceremonies. This included creation stories, which follow the first man and woman, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. But again, those aren't our stories to tell. Go speak with the Navajo people. Go look into their writings, the literature, or better yet, go hear an oral telling.
Yeah, absolutely. So why are we talking about all this? Well, this does have to do with this idea of skinwalkers and kind of how skinwalkers have made it into the zeitgeist of, I would say, current culture. Like it does exist inside of like some current culture, and we'll talk about how it got there. So the term skinwalkers were part of what was described as an enemy class that counteracted the balance and harmony that existed within the Navajo community. These were folks that would come from the outside in and try to disrupt that harmony and cause chaos inside of the communities. They were a group of witches who were considered criminals. They practiced black magic and had the ability to shapeshift into any animal they chose.
That would be a cool power. I would accept that power.
I would accept that power as long as I was practicing beneficence. Like, it was like, I would do that because I would want to like maybe turn into a crow and deliver you shiny things or, something like that. Like, I would never want to like harm you as a result of this.
Yeah, it's true. I wouldn't want to do it as a like weapon.
Yeah.
I would also do it if it was just for fun for me. And as long as I wasn't hurting people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, importantly, though, if someone was identified as a potential skinwalker, then that was pretty much a death sentence. You are to be killed on sight. Leave no no mercy here.
Folks who were identified as skinwalkers were like specifically identified as aiming to be malevolent towards the community. They were specifically out to hurt the community at large, and the Navajo peoples were not willing to let that happen to their community.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it sounds like they were considered particularly dangerous, and sort of like, if you got the chance, you better take it because you might not get that chance again.
Right.
They had the ability to change into any animal they chose, usually taking the form of a wolf or a coyote, and they transformed by dressing in the hide of that animal. So maybe they could turn into a bear if they wanted to and be much harder of a thing. And so, again, if they're out to cause harm, that's their only real mission. And you get an opportunity to stop one, I think the tradition would suggest, like, take that opportunity. Otherwise, more people will get hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to kill a skinwalker, though, they had to be shot in the neck. Wounds that the skinwalker obtained in animal form would remain when they transformed back into a human, though. So if you did not have a kill shot where the skinwalker was mortally wounded and died, like if they had an injury to their leg or lost a limb, that would translate into their human form as well, which is very different than like what we know about lycanthropy, where like if a werewolf is injured and they turn back into a human, they don't sustain those injuries afterwards. So like the mythos of like the werewolf, and that's why I kind of wanted to bring that up at the beginning too. The mythos of the werewolf and lycanthropy is very different than the skinwalker stories and kind of how we arrive at these. They might be derivative, but like it's the skinwalker story is a little bit different and has different outcomes and different kind of like rules about it,
Sure. This does make me think that it might be worth for some Halloween episode covering the various ways to kill cryptids, because we talked about cryptids, I think last year or the year before. It seems like there are a lot of the traditions and stories around cryptids have unique ways that they must be killed. Thinking like stake in the heart, the silver bullet, shot in the neck, like things like that. I'm curious, sort of like, how did those, first of all, they had to be unique to the technology of the time. Like a silver bullet doesn't mean anything several hundred years before guns are invented.
Right.
And so like, what were the secret weapons of killing? Why was that the secret weapon or whatever? And even why were they mostly unkillable aside from a secret weapon. Like
Yeah.
most other animals can die by any means, really,
Yeah.
including just putting them in an unfamiliar environment.
Yeah, I know one of the for werewolves in particular, like it was a silver bullet, or you could like beat them with a stick with a silver handle.
Oh, okay.
So like I guess just silver is like a whole thing, but like like with
just
werewolf
nearby
or
all.
with like it's like get a handful of silver and just like I guess maybe make some silver brass knuckles or something. That would probably be helpful. So, but I think like the thing is when you get into like these mythos, like you just learn that like there's always a trap door. There's always a weakness, right? And so like anytime there's a cryptid or like a story of like some evil thing, there's always like an Achilles heel. And it feels like that starts all the way. Like, I mean, I would imagine like the idea of like that weakness or Achilles heel starts way back then. And even before then, there's always like something. Like I know that like for modern times, my Achilles heel is ads.
Okay, so we have been talking about we finally got to Skinwalkers. We're there now.
Mm-hmm.
Modern versions and stories of Skinwalkers exist in the media as well. So versions of the werewolf story or the Skinwalker's cousin, the Wendigo.
Mm-hmm.
Wendigo, I feel like I've maybe heard it called.
Yeah.
These all now have some type of media presence or version that really doesn't quite capture the original culture, but is still sort of a new retelling of that idea.
Yeah.
There's a movie I recommended that had the Wendigo as the sort of monster in it that came out not that long ago.
Antlers.
Oh, that was it. Yeah.
I remember that coming up because like the Wendigo is like an interesting mythos as well. Like there's like an interesting kind of like story around that. I mean, Stephen King used it for Pet Sematary. So
Nice.
I think what I want to kind of point out too is like this term, like these stories show up, but they're kind of bastardized versions of it. And we'll talk about that later. For now, I want to talk about why the term skinwalker might sound familiar to you. So the most popularized skinwalker story is that of Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. I'm going to keep this brief because this story is a little bit wild, but it does involve scientists, which I think is really fun. So first, the Sherman family owned a 480-acre ranch in Uintah County, which already has a long history. Like by the time they got this ranch, it already had a long history of UFO sightings, cattle mutilations, and strange creature sightings. So this was something that was already kind of happening in the area by the time the Sherman family took ownership of this ranch.
Sure. Okay. Is this our UFO tie-in or is there more?
Yeah, this is going to be our UFO tie-in for sure.
Okay, got you. So the owner of the ranch, a person going by the name Robert Bigelow.
Sounds made up.
It does actually sound very, very made up. Bob Bigelow. Bob's Bigelow. Mr. Bigelow here is the owner of Budget Suites of America and the founder of Bigelow Aerospace, which is looking to expand into space hotels, incidentally, just FYI. He was successful in launching the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and those are still in orbit. But this dude prefers paranormal studies, is where his real passion lies.
He's getting his financial backing for his paranormal studies from aerospace design and invention, so in space hotels. So on the ranch, he had hired a team of scientists to start an enterprise called the National Institute for Discovery Science, which sounds really, really formal.
It does, and very cool.
It sounds very cool. Like, I want to be part of the NIDS, the NIDS. The problem, though, is this group of scientists and paranormal researchers beginning to kind of work and observe phenomena occurring on the ranch. Originally, the ranch itself was called UFO Ranch because of the UFO sightings that had been reported to take place on it, but it was changed to Skinwalker Ranch because of, you'll see in a second, but it also sounds easier. It rolls off the tongue easier and has like more media kind of glitz and glamour than UFO Ranch.
Yeah. And this is eventually where the Manson family would hole up. Just kidding. Different ranch.
They showed up at a different ranch, yeah. A scarier ranch.
Ranch dressing. Anyway, they never directly observed a skinwalker, of course, but during their observations, there were unexplained lights and occasional cattle mutilations. Ooh, okay.
Ooh, yeah.
Which we talked about a bit in our episode on UFOs or UAPs, objects that fly.
Yeah.
What is interesting about the mutilations is that they didn't align with predation behavior, which again we talked about there. It appeared that they were simply just mutilating and killing cattle without necessarily eating them, which predators typically do.
Right. So the team left the ranch with no explanation for what happened, except for they landed on clinical lycanthropy. And they mentioned that a few times, but never fully explained that. So if you don't know what clinical lycanthropy is, that means when you are psychologically believing you can change into an animal. We did an episode on that as well. If you're interested in that, go listen to that. But that's about as close as they got to the Skinwalker theory on the ranch without any sort of research on the traditions around what a skinwalker was, what it did, and all that stuff. Like, so they just kind of went, oh yeah, it must be a werewolf, and kind of were like, we're done, and left.
Now that right there is just good science. I
mean, yeah, we're tired of trying to answer this question. We don't want an answer.
We landed on Skinwalker. It feels like our job is done here.
Yeah.
As a quick just explanation of the cattle mutilation thing, essentially, the animals die for all kinds of reasons. When they die, their bodies tend to swell from the gases inside from the bacteria that are still in there. That causes the skin to tear in very straight lines. And also a lot of animals and insects, when they are consuming a cadaver, a corpse, a dead animal, whatever, they tend to go for the soft tissue first. So they tend to eat out the eyes and like just all the soft tissue parts. And so what'll happen is you'll go into observe one of these animals and it'll have these like very straight incisions where the skin tore, but it tore like sort of along a very natural seam in this animal's skin.
Right.
Like tears tend to not be jagged. When they're stretched to that way, they tend to be a straight line. But anyway, so that's the callback to what was going on there.
Yeah, that's what they were observing.
Yes, yeah, that was what they saw. That looked like cattle mutilation. But let's talk about cultural appropriation.
Yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, the Skinwalker stories, the origin stories, the oral traditions of the Navajo peoples belong to the Navajo peoples. So these stories belong to them and are passed down through oral tradition and storytelling. But for cultures that their primary mechanism is this kind of oral tradition, they preserve their culture through oral tradition. And any groups that take and bastardize that can be a real problem. So they'll hear some kind of snippet of a story and they'll go, that sounds cool. Let me bring this piece of your culture into the limelight. And then they take it and they change it and they alter it. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with like the original purpose or reason or traditions about that. And so that's kind of what ends up happening here with Skinwalker stories. They get pulled into this world where they become kind of fantasy creatures.
It's like making a Deadpool that doesn't have a mouth and can spontaneously appear and disappear.
Uh-huh. Yeah. You hear us, Fox?
And shoot lasers out of his eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a wild time.
Besides a constant portrayal as these sort of quote-unquote fantasy creatures, elements of important cultural stories are taken, again without credit, and altered to ultimately create a sort of less nuanced version of these tales. Because again, most of the time, the more easily consumable version is black and white, good versus evil. The motivation of evil is just to be evil, very sort of one-dimensional.
Right, and it lacks the kind of the importance to the people that these stories belong to, right?
Yeah, like the cultural relevance and how that relates to sort of the mythologies and their history.
Yeah, like a Wendigo, like as a fantasy creature, sounds really scary, but like when you understand kind of the origins and the nature of the storytelling and why we tell that story, it's a completely different experience for understanding where that comes from and why it's so important for the people that tell that story.
Right.
For this next little bit, I want to go and I want to make sure we credit specifically nativeappropriations.com. This is somebody who writes a lot about the cultural zeitgeist and how many storytellers will kind of take elements of native people stories and like these types of things and turn them into something they're not. One such instance is the Harry Potter series specific. So, known asshole J.K. Rowling shockingly began incorporating magical traditions inside of the Harry Potter world in a series of short stories titled Magic in North America. And this was all designed to kind of lead up to the stories of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. This was kind of a series of short stories that were kind of describing magics and different type of magical relics and behaviors and stuff that existed inside of North America. Because the Harry Potter series kind of focused more on like Eurocentric those types of practices. Even like the Goblet of Fire was like France, Russia, and England, effectively, right?
Right.
So, like, the Fantastic Beasts takes magic to America and starts kind of exploring what it looked like here. And these short stories, Magic in North America, started taking from some of these traditions and turning them into something very different for the sake of the story.
Yeah, and the concern here is that for the Navajo peoples, the Dene, these stories and traditions, they're not like they're gone. These aren't just like stories that are buried in history. These are still alive. Like, they're still part of their cultures and traditions, and yet then they're sort of being appropriated, they're being pulled into and repackaged and retold with not really credit to them either, and being turned into fantasy stories that equated to things like the Salem witch trials, with J.K. Rowling producing such a surface level understanding of the concepts that it just does a disservice to the culture and the people that it's from whom it's stolen. So in the stories, Rowling even goes so far as to say the Skinwalkers were just made up by Nomage.
Yeah, Nomage. They call them Nomages in the United States in that one.
Got you.
That's essentially the equivalent of Muggles in the Harry Potter world, which is just people who don't know magic.
Yeah, and that's their way of explaining wizards, essentially, is how she sort of pulls in that belief system.
Yeah, basically she's saying that, like, oh, Skinwalkers are just wizards that people who are non-magic say are this story or this tale, rather than just going, oh, they're wizards. So basically saying Skinwalkers are made up. It's just wizards playing with this idea of changing their skin, which is like kind of like dismissive to the whole tradition of like what's going on here and why the Skinwalker tradition, like the Skinwalker story, is so important for the people.
I feel like it would feel that way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's an assumption that I would, and I mean, and maybe there's some folks that are like, I don't know, it's kind of cool that people are talking about it. And it's very possible that's the case, but nativeappropriations.com is like, no, this is actually real bad.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we should be respectful of that.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a thing that they're specifically asking us not to do, those are their stories. So
yeah, absolutely. So I do think it's worth kind of, for the sake of the show, something that we always do is we try to look at like the science behind something.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, there is no scientific evidence that a human can turn into an animal. And I just want to kind of say that part out loud so that when we start talking about like,
animals,
we are animals, right? But we're not going to we can't shape shift, I guess is maybe the word that I'm looking for, right? So like
we don't turn into different animals.
We don't turn into different animals. Exactly. So there's no scientific evidence of that. But I do think that it is important to look at some behavioral scientific takeaways from this. And the one thing that I kind of take away from this is that stories that belong to people can do a few things for those people.
Yes. Real quick, though, because we're talking about this, I was watching a science video recently on YouTube, and that pointed out that most species on Earth go through some form of metamorphosis. The fact that humans don't is actually kind of unique. Like, a lot of species obviously don't, but like most of them do.
Sure.
You think of like a caterpillar to a butterfly. Jellyfish begin as these like little polyp things, and then will eventually, they're like plants and then basically turn into jellyfish.
Weird.
Yeah. So most species do. And so anyway, at this time, humans don't do that we're aware of.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
We were talking about the importance of the stories here. And one is that these stories can often operate as sort of a rule for specific behavior. These rules can look like things not to do, watch out, or blank will get you, or blank will happen to you, is one version of that. And then there are other ways that rules can also be like, do this thing for good fortune or good luck, or it's as a general value to the group.
Right. And stories can also connect people in a shared cultural experience and stitch together important moral stories. Like the moral of the story is to do this, or the moral, like kind of like these moral ideas. And that's what the Bible is really supposed to do. The Bible is not supposed to be a literal interpretation, because humans can't live in the belly of a whale or be turned into pillars of salt. But they're supposed to be moral tales, moral stories that allow you to think deeply, think critically about your behavior and how you act towards other people or inside of your community. And I think it's really important that people do have a shared culture. And this is the Skinwalker idea is part of a shared culture of people that have these stories to share with one another.
I was actually just thinking when you mentioned I was thinking of the pillar of salt as the moral teaching there is don't look back at a thing that's happening that you're escaping.
Right.
I guess, because it's a moral issue.
Yeah.
Anyway, another thing about these stories is that they describe cultural relevancies among a group of people. These stories are a way for people to share their ideas, their values, their perspectives, in a way that just sort of stating those as rules or declarations may not have the same effect. So it's a different way to spread that message.
Right. And there are important unspoken cultural factors to stories that someone who lacks the nuance or lacks the insight about that culture will not understand. If they misunderstand the purpose of a story and they lack the cultural context for what that story means or what it does, they're going to take that and they're going to ruin it, which is very possible that we may have done the same thing here by giving some basic structure to like what the Skinwalker story is. But like the truth is this is pulled from Native American resources. So I want to be clear about that. And if we take these stories and we take them beyond the culture or take them outside of the cultural context, it doesn't have the same meaning. So somebody, and this is really true. I mean, this is where I kind of plug the How to Rethink Human Behavior book by Bernard Guerin. And I will do that 100 times over because this is exactly what it is. An outside understanding of an internal culture will yield a misunderstanding unless you have important cultural insights or unless you are part or embedded inside of that culture to understand the importance of those stories and the meanings behind them.
It makes a lot of sense. I completely agree. And it is important that we state that and make sure that that's really clear because, as you said, we're just not going to be able to get the nuance from this in a format like a podcast. And like, they're dealing with people who basically take their stories, retell them in a way that's not really faithful. And then we go and play a bunch of ads that have nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're back, and I think that's we've said what we mostly plan to say about Skinwalkers, but we do have a few interesting tidbits to share. One is that the War Department during World War II used Navajo code talkers to help relay information via radio using their own language, and it was so effective that it was actually never decoded. And using this strategy led to several successful missions during the war, and something we have talked about coming back to the code talkers in another episode because just such a cool, amazing little piece of history.
I think that's what I've learned as I've gotten older is like the history of World War II is less fascinating than like the smaller stories that like are interlinked. Like I think that those are far more fascinating. Like the random, successful missions of like stealing thick water so that the Nazis can't get it to build the atom bomb during, the Manhattan projects and all that stuff. Like there's a lot of really cool things that happen inside of it. So I don't know. I think
war is stupid.
Yeah. It's war is the worst. But at least there are some interesting things inside of it that like the Navajo code talkers, which is like we're able to leverage something that worked really well to help, prevent Nazis from winning. And except they're here now again. So did we really win? Anyway, I'm not going to get real dark on that. That's a different scary episode. Another, I think, interesting tidbit is that Stephen King actually used the concept of Skinwalkers in a book called Wind Through the Keyhole, which is the 8th entry into the Dark Tower series. If you have not read the Dark Tower series, you should. But in this book, Roland Deschain, who is he's the protagonist, he tells a story about when he was younger. He had just become a gunslinger, and he was dispatched to a remote mining town to find and kill what he called the Skin Man, which was a sorcerer that was actually wreaking havoc in the town and killing miners and killing people in really gruesome fashion. And he would turn into predatory creatures like bears and wolves and stuff like that. And it's a really awesome story. And I think it's probably closer to kind of I would say maybe the general feel of what a Skinwalker was supposed to do. Like it feels like there's a little bit more respect to the idea of Skinwalker in this than what you'll see in J.K. Rowling stuff.
Is this where you actually got the idea for this episode?
It might be actually. I didn't think about that. I feel like it's very possible because the Dark Tower lives in my head rent free. So it is very, very possible that's where that came from. But I think like either way, it's an awesome story. And it does kind of hit the hallmarks of the original like ethos of the Skinwalker thing, right? Like it's a malevolent creature, sorcerer, witch type of thing that is killing people and causing disharmony in a town.
Yeah, right.
So
like they're just causing harm and they transform into an animal to do some of that.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I think, sort of closing this out, just the sort of final take-home points. Groups and cultures who have an oral tradition like this, we want to show them respect. I think that they've earned it. They deserve it. We certainly don't earn the rights to take that away from them or those stories. And you can't just take a story without knowing the nuances of that story and then exploit it, basically.
Right.
Turn it into whatever you need it to be to serve some personal gain, but instead respect that, the groups of people from whom these ideas originated.
Yeah. And Skinwalkers are part of a specific storytelling device about evil and unbalance in the world of the Navajo. And also, we don't know all the nuances about the story because it's protected. It's protected by oral tradition. It's protected from outsiders who are coming in trying to exploit that story. So, what we have told is a cursory overview of what this is. If you want to know more about it, please read Navajo resources about it because they're the experts on it and it is their story to tell.
And we had mentioned the Skinwalker Ranch and didn't go really far into it, and that's because it's mostly just in name. The story of the Skinwalker Ranch just had to do with the fact that it was called the Skinwalker Ranch. There really wasn't anything Skinwalker-y related to it as far as
right.
we know, but the UFOs now, for sure.
Yeah. That was a UFO thing. That was very unlikely a magic sorcery thing.
Indeed. All right. I think that is what we have to say about these Skinwalkers. Thank you so much for joining us. Whenever we record an episode, when we're done, we tend to recommend some things. They are often, if not always, completely unrelated to our topic at hand. Not always. Every once in a while they are. But typically it's just a thing we're recommending. Sometimes an activity, sometimes a movie or a book or a TV show or a song or an album or whatever. It's just something.
Right.
And I think that that's fun. So we're going to do that. But first, I must give credit where credit is due. As I mentioned, to support the show, you can leave us a rating and a review, like and subscribe, tell a friend. You can also support us financially if you're in the mood to do so. Head over to patreon.com/WWD podcast, and you will be able to get access to all kinds of bonus things. You get early episodes, ad-free episodes, behind-the-scenes content, all of that sort of thing. And I also, maybe your favorite perk of all will be that I will read your name for helping us do our mission. That is Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, we love you all so much.
And then, of course, thank you to my team of people without whom I could not make this happen. Writing and fact-checking from Shane and myself. Thank you so much for putting together the notes on this one and recording with me today, Shane.
Anytime. Thank you for letting me do that.
Oh, I need you.
It's a team effort.
It is a team effort. That is absolutely true. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and the guy in the chair who makes the episodes happen in a way that I can feel good about publishing is Justin, who is our audio engineer extraordinaire.
Yeah, Grustin Jeanhouse.
That's right, Grustin Jeanhouse. Thank you all so much for listening. Is there anything that I forgot or anything you'd like to add before we transition to recommendations?
No, I don't think so.
All right, let's recommend some things.
Yay! Recommendations. All right, so I just finished a book, and it's a big book, and it's a wonderful book. And it is, I think, in line with spooky season a little bit, because it is Stephen King.
True.
But the book is not so spooky. And that book is called 11/22/63. It is a novel written in 2012 by Stephen King. Apparently that year he published 14 books. So he does not.
Whoa.
Yeah, he is kind of an unstoppable force when it comes to writing. Oh no, I'm sorry, not that year. The decade. Let me rephrase that. The decade. Yeah, let me go back.
That's a lot of books. A book a month.
Yeah, that's a lot. I don't think he did that much. So let me rephrase that. So 11/22/63 is the story of Jake Epping, and he is tasked with going back in time to stop the Kennedy assassination. And it's kind of a really interesting play on the time travel tropes that come up.
Right.
And some of the different things that come up there. But I do think, like all Stephen King books, it is a really great insight on the human experience, about having to look back at the past, about having to learn to let go, about ripples that occur, when you do certain things and how your actions have consequences. And I think it's a really powerful, incredible story. It's one of his best stories, and it's not a horror story. And so I think that it's one of those things where it's just worth the read even if you don't like Stephen King, it is worth the read.
I agree. Very unique, very brilliantly well done story. Yes, I very much enjoyed that book.
It's so good.
At the time of this recording, I am in Hawaii. I have been here for work, and I have actually been through Lahaina. If many people remember that name, it is because Lahaina suffered a major fire just recently, and they are still in the recovery process from that fire. So this was the 2023 fire. It burned a historical part of the village. A lot of the damage is stuff that's never going to be undone.
Right.
Anyway, it's pretty tragic to behold, and I really feel for the people here who are still trying to recover from that, and then also run businesses, have families, have schools up and running, have tourism. It's really tough. So I'm recommending, I found a little donation charity thing called Lahaina Fire Recovery Donation. If you go to lahaina.givingcircles.io, you can find it there. Those links will be in the show notes. Lahaina is spelled Lahaina. And yeah, just trying to help support the recovery efforts here. You know, I think coming here to be a tourist is all well and good in its own right. And just giving directly to the services and the people who need support is, if that's your intention, that will go further. Right. Than just sort of being in the general proximity and spending it on the companies that sort of host tourism stuff. Not to say that they don't find value in that. They do. But I think if your intention really is to support them, then you can just give directly and look around. There might be other donation things that speak to you more, but that's just one that I found. So anyway, that's my little call to action.
I love that. Yep. I second that one for sure.
Cool. All right. If you'd like to tell us about Skinwalkers or donations or books by Stephen King that you like, you can email us directly. We love hearing from people, and you can reach us on social media. Our email is info@wwd.podcast.com, and a similar string of letters that would follow our social media accounts where you can get a hold of us. We look forward to hearing from you. I think that we have otherwise done the credits. Is there anything you'd like to add before we say our goodbyes?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Thank you all for listening. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.